So, hello, I'm a third-year PhD student in the department. I did my MA at York as well in the 19th century in literature and culture MA, so if you want to talk about that, do ask me questions about that, from 2012 to 2013. My PhD is on changing representations of Charles Dickens, so biographies, literary tourism, diaries, letters, that kind of thing. So what I want to talk a bit about then is some of the decisions I made as a PhD student, going from MA to PhD, self-funding, shock horror, and things that people that I've spoken to and things that I myself wish that I'd known and thought about before I started my PhD. But I'm happy to touch on anything to do with the MA a bit more specifically as well. Okay, so I chose the MA in 19th century literature and culture at York because I knew that that was the period that I wanted to focus on. But it's also an interdisciplinary MA that gave me the opportunity to think about history, history of art, music. I didn't end up taking extra departmental modules from other departments, but it still had that kind of interdisciplinary focus and also the ability to dip into modules from other areas too. So you have kind of central modules in your period, but the option to go out a bit as well. So I took an 18th century module in the King's Manor, the lovely old buildings that they get in the centre of York, and a very theoretical modern module, as well as my Victorian stuff. It's really nice to have access to those different centres and all those different bits, basically, and that's one of the great things about York, that not only is there a really lovely community, but it's quite a diverse community that gives you this kind of opportunity to experience a lot of different things, both in the kind of seminars that Max and Alex were talking about, but also in your degree. Again, fun, supportive environment. I've got Cake Thursday on there as well. I knew someone would mention it before I did. It's come up twice now. I think people think of research projects as being quite isolating, and that's something PhD students worry about, but there really is no need. There's so many different people who want to be your friend and want to include you and want to feed you cake and wine, cake and wine. So that was one of the reasons that I chose York and one of the reasons that I stayed here as well. The MA can be a good opportunity to pin down your PhD project. So if you're going from MA to PhD now and it's completely different, don't worry. You don't have to do that. But it's a nice way of starting to ease yourself into thinking about a longer PhD project, even using your dissertation potentially to try out ideas. So I did my dissertation on a smaller bit of Dickens and then expanded. At the very least, it's an opportunity to start putting feelers out, talking to people and getting advice. Even if you don't want to stay at York, you want to go on and do a PhD somewhere else. Everyone here is very happy to help you, advise you, put you in touch with people. And that's a really lovely thing about York. So get advice on your ideas if you do want to do that MA to PhD transition. Talk to prospective supervisors and use the MA as an opportunity to really find out if you enjoy that kind of research project and if this kind of thing is for you. And I think that Bobby's going to talk about some of the other things that you might do other than that kind of academic stuff. Self-funding, the kind of taboo thing. Some people don't like to talk about it. Funding is very competitive. We can't all have funding. We all know that, but people don't necessarily want to talk about it. I stand before you as a self-funder, proud. If you do get funding, congratulations, that's brilliant. If you didn't, know that you don't need it to do a PhD. I mean, you need money, obviously, but you don't need to be funded in order to have that kind of value in your research. And you don't need funding to get an academic job. Don't let people tell you otherwise. But you do need to know what you're getting yourself into. So PhDs are all about planning, drawing up these lovely detailed plans for 3 years, and then 6 months later thinking this is never going to happen. Changing what you're doing, updating the plan, thinking about how it's all going to work. You need to do that perhaps a bit more as a self-funded PhD student. But that's all kind of part and parcel of being a PhD student. There are also lots of opportunities at York to ease the self-funding. Things like the English department provides every PhD student with at least the opportunity to do some undergraduate teaching. It doesn't even have to be work outside of your career ambition. So it can be something like teaching in the department. There's also teaching for the writing centre. That's me in front of the writing centre. So what I do is for about 4 to 6 hours a week, I read student essays and give them feedback on structure and that kind of thing from every department. including biology and maths and physics, and I don't really know what their essays are about. That's fine, because I know what structure should look like. So there's things like the Writing Centre, the Careers Service. There's a great internship scheme with the Institute for Public Understanding of the Past that offers paid internships with people like Horrible Histories TV series, and the production company that does Poldark. They want a postgraduate student to help do the research for a new 18th century series that we don't know what it is. So those things come up every year. There are other teaching opportunities in schools, and these are all paid. So it's good to know what's out there. There's also smaller pots of funding that you can apply for throughout your degree, both in the university and outside. So for example, the department has conference and research funding available. The York Graduate Research School has just announced a fund specifically for unfunded PhD students that offers up to £500 a year. There's the Santander Award, which offers up to £1,000 a year. It's supposed to be for innovative research projects. I got to go to some libraries for a few weeks. Somebody else went to an Eastern European women's prison. I'm not quite sure how that compared, but I had fun. And then external organisations. So the British Comparative Literature Association offers money for postgraduate students to go to conferences, put conferences on. The Victorian or Romantic or Modern Studies associations, they all have funding available. So there's always bits and pieces you can do to make your life a bit easier, basically. So you're not defeated yet. Hats. I put playing DressUp in my title, and it's both metaphorical and literal. This is me in a judge's wig, and I'll get on to why in a minute. So this is not just about your graduation Tudor bonnet. Everybody's PhD tends to be sort of interdisciplinary or cross-period or somehow doesn't fit comfortably into one box. You'd think that me working on Charles Dickens, I would be in the Victorians box inside of the English box. But actually, because I look at biographies and things, I haven't even read all of Dickens's novels. Shame on me. But I work on lots of other things like material history. So you're constantly looking at kind of different fields and intersecting with a lot of different research. And most PhD students do. Most PhD students feel like that they don't fit quite into one box. And this is actually a good thing, because it means you can fit into all the boxes that you want to. You can have all these different hats, and that's where the hats come in. So don't be afraid to branch out a bit. These are some of the hats you might have. So different centres all put on fantastic events. So KEX does, so the Centre for 18th Century Studies, KEX, does conferences, major conferences, postgraduate talks every 2 weeks. The Centre for Modern Studies has a forum as well that does talks, has a massive conference. The other centres, I think, do, but I don't go to those. So get to know the centres that you're in and where your research kind of intersects. Conferences. I don't know why, but the International Dickens Society conference this year is in Iceland. I'm not sure Dickens ever mentioned Iceland, but I'm very grateful because I'm looking forward to going to Iceland. So yeah, conferences are a lot of fun, getting to speak to people about your research, go to exciting places sometimes. Sometimes it's in Hull, but sometimes it's in Iceland. And yeah, PhDs can involve a bit more public speaking than you might expect. So coming on to the judge's costume, things like public engagement, going out and sharing your research with adults or children is quite fun, and something that happens every year here at York, the York Festival of Ideas, which kind of takes over the whole city, but the HRC puts on a festival fringe day for children where they ask postgraduates to design activities for children. So this was a Richard III activity. This is a cardboard car park, and they opened flaps and there were clues hidden in the cardboard car park. And then we did a mock trial where they got to judge Richard III, and I was the judge. So that's why I have this picture. And that's a lot of fun. And again, it's another kind of hat, a more literal one this time. But other PhD students I know have done things like go on the BBC as experts, give talks to radio stations in New Zealand for some reason, give tours around York, do interviews with some of the authors they're even working on, and that kind of thing. So there's so many different things you can kind of get involved with in lots of different areas. So don't kind of be too narrowly focused, I think. So a bit of PhD advice then. I feel like this is what PhD students feel like when they start, that they don't know anything and they absolutely panic. So my main bit of advice, I think, would be try and find out what you don't know, and also think about the skills that you might need. Doing a PhD is a learning process. You're not expected to know everything when you start, because why would you spend 3 years on it if you did? So don't be afraid of not knowing. Use the time in your first year to find your feet, take a breath. Lots of people that I know who did PhDs say that they didn't use any of the writing they did in their first year in their final thesis at all. I don't know if that's true. I haven't got to the final thesis yet. But it's okay to kind of be developing. You're not expected to know everything immediately. It's also, so as mentioned, it's good to think about the skills you need. Just like you can audit modules as an MA student, you can audit MA modules as a PhD student. So I generally avoid the 20th century and onwards, and I realised that my PhD goes into the 20th century. So I audited a modernism module. It was useful. I'm not sure, I don't think I would have wanted to take it as an MA module because it's not my sort of comfortable area, but it was very, very useful to have that opportunity to develop my knowledge in that area. York also has the researcher development team that offers courses on things like planning projects, public speaking, writing CVs, applying for jobs. They run courses all year, for every year of your PhD, and even a teaching qualification, sort of, third of a teaching qualification you can do. So learn what you don't know, develop your skills. York is really good for that. One thing that I didn't know, how to read Dickens's handwriting. I didn't realise when I started that I was going to be dealing with some original manuscripts that no one had ever written out. And I can see why, with some of them, no one's actually written it out. His handwriting, this is blown up, it's absolutely tiny. And I read one letter, I think from someone else in his family, couldn't get anything out of it, and then I realised the last paragraph was an apology for how bad the handwriting was. And I couldn't even read that. So I realised that paleography was a skill that I wanted to work on. And that was just something that I had not anticipated. So try and think about the skills that you might need, especially when you're doing things like archival work and you have sort of limited time with a lot of exciting stuff. So some more bits of advice. This is from the world of Twitter. Go on Twitter, that's my main bit of advice. It's another really supportive community, essentially. Twitterstorians on Twitter. I asked them what they wish they'd known before they started their PhD. And here are some of the things they said. There are a lot more, so if you find me on Twitter, there's a list of like 30 bits of advice. And they're nicely positive, I think, not so fear-mongering as some of the stuff is. No writing is wasted. So I think some people worry that everything they write and produce has to be perfect and they don't want to do any writing for like 2 years. It's all a work in progress until it's handed in, basically. And then it's a work in progress for the book you're going to write afterwards. Own your own work. You'll end up being the person who knows the most about the thing you're doing out of anybody probably in the world. And your supervisor obviously knows a lot, can point you in a lot of directions, but you're becoming an equal in that research environment. As you are as an MA student, you're kind of becoming more a colleague than a student. Every project is different. People like to compare their projects with other people and think, oh, they've done more than I have, and they're upgrading earlier, and they've done this exciting thing and I haven't. But different opportunities come at different times, different projects are completely different. Don't compare yourself to other people, basically. So lots of advice there that you could use. My main final bit of advice is be skeptical of all advice. Projects are unique and individual. A lot of advice is anecdotal and personal and things that worked out for certain people. The Times Higher Education seems to like to put out clickbait articles about everything you shouldn't do as a PhD student because you've ruined it now and you'll never get a job. That's just ridiculous. So be skeptical of everything I'm saying and everything everyone else is saying. But do try and manage your relationship with your supervisor. Think about what you need from them, what you can expect from them. Get to know what what that relationship should look like, because again, it's going to be different with different supervisors, but you need what works for you. Wear all your different hats, but don't forget that your main hat should be your PhD. There's lots of other stuff to get excited about, but that's what you're here to finish. PhDs can be isolating, but as everyone has touched on so far, there's so many communities here to help with that. So don't feel like you're alone in this. Everyone's doing something slightly different, but everybody is here to engage in this community. And finally, just don't be afraid to ask for help. I'm here to answer questions. I can solve all your problems. But generally, there are lots of people here you can talk to. There's the research and development team, the HRC, the department, the centres, and your peers. PhDs are unlike anything else you've ever done, probably. I'd say that that's true definitely for me and probably for most people. And you're not expected to know exactly how it should go. And I'm still learning how mine should go. And that is kind of how it is until the end. So hopefully that's given you sort of overview of what PhDs are like. So thank you and good luck.